Hello everyone, welcome to the second video of system design series and let me make some clarity on this. So currently this series is focusing on the high level system design. So high level system basically focuses on the components that will be used. There's other area of system design, that is low level system design, that deals with the low level details like what how would request would look like, how response would look like, what are the fields that we will be using in the entities, how a database entity would look like. So those low level details will be covered as a separate topic, but for now we will be focusing on the high level system design that focuses on the components that a system uses for its functionality. So in last video we uh, looked over the API gateway or load balancer, your application that is could be running anything like a blogging website or maybe a YouTube like or a Twitter like service. And we also had a look at the ELK stack, which I didn't explain in quite detail. And we also had a look at the database. Very brief, but we had a look at that. So this diagram helps you visualize the components. There are some additional components that we will also be covering, and each component has its own specific advantage, a specific use case that it's used for. So with this visualization, you can have a better understanding how a system could look like. Okay, let's have a look at the components. So, the first component that we have having a look at is the API gateway. So, API gateway is a component in itself. So, it's a standalone machine on its own that has some application code written in it that is responsible for managing the requests that it receives, and it tries to authenticate them, and it forwards them to the appropriate backend server that we have at here. So this is the basic working of API gateway. And with the API gateway, it makes sense to have a load balancer on the same instance. So what a load balancer will do is it will make sure, as I already explained, balances the traffic onto each application instance that you have. So API gateway act as a proxy because for the outside world it is receiving the request and it is providing the response to the client. And so this is the first thing that a API gateway do. Second, it balancing the load, which is a separate component in itself, but it's doing that as well. And the third thing that it can do is it can authenticate the request. So when a request is received at the API gateway, so it tries to make sure that this request is legitimate, and it then forwards the request to appropriate application. So this is one of the thing. So let's have a uh, small view at the what is authentication and what is authorization. So authentication means that the user is legitimate. So it generally done using like username password. So we can have a multi-factor authentication as well, where we will be asking for an OTP from your SMS or from your email. So this is all to make sure that user is legitimate, user has the correct credentials for logging into the website. And the second thing is authorization. So authorization essentially means that the user who is legitimate, whether they have the uh, they have the privilege to use their specific operation. So let's say you have a uh, application for blogs. So admin can have authority to delete the blogs, but a normal user only can view them or read them. So a normal user has a normal legitimate user can view, but when he tries to edit or tries to delete, he will get that you are not authorized to perform this action. But when a admin does the same operation, the system will allow them to do so because they are authorized to do that operation. That operation here is uh, delete or edit. So this is the difference between authentication and authorization. And so that part, so there are multiple ways of doing that, forming the authentication and authorization. So we will not covering that part, but keep in mind that we can do that part on the API gateway, and it makes sense to do so because uh, it can it can deny the unauthorized request, and it can deny the unauthorized request, and it can also make sure that non-legitimate user doesn't even make to the actual server. So this is so that's why it makes sense that API gateway does the authorization part as well. There's some authentic user that is trying to read some application blog on from your website. So how would the flow look like when a user tries to do that? Let's go component wise. So let's say there's a web browser that makes the request that request will land to the API gateway. The API gateway will authentication and authorize that request, and that request will be forwarded to the load balancer. Now the load balancer will choose one of the application instance to entertain that request. So one of the application instance receives that request and processes it. So while processing a request, there's a possibility that some DB operations are being performed. So some DB queries will be fired, and we will get some response from DB. And while we are performing some operation, there's a possibility that some logs are generated, and those logs will be passed on to the ELK stack. So this is what could happen when a request is generated. So we perform some DB operation, we generate some logs, those are forwarded to the ELK stack, and a response is generated, and that response is uh, re reverted back to the API gateway, which reverts back to the client. So that's how a uh, request response flow could look like in a normal application. So, okay, so let's have a look at the ELK stack here. So ELK stands for Elastic Logstash and Kibana. So Elastic is a database that we our application use for storing the logs. So Elastic is a essentially a database that works well with text. So logs are generally a text, so that's why Elastic is quite suitable for storing information, text information, which is logs into the Elastic database. So Logstash is a component that does the job of collecting logs from different sources. In here, our different sources are multiple instances of application and forwards, parse them, maybe some add metadata, maybe you have some indexes you have created on your logs. So those indexes will help you to search better on your logs. So those indexes are added to your logs. And we can do that using the growth pattern, something called growth pattern. And after adding some metadata and everything, the log stash forwarded the logs to your database, that is Elastic database. And when those logs are stored in the Elastic database, you may want to uh, analyze them. So for that analysis part, we can use Kibana. So Kibana is used for searching the logs. Maybe there are some patterns. Maybe there's some specific error you want the count of. Maybe you want to know the whether a specific user with certain ID has accessed a certain endpoint how many times. So those are the things that you can uh, figure out with the help of Kibana. So Kibana is one of the things that help us in monitoring such things. And okay, so as ELK stack, Grafana is other tool that is used for monitoring purposes. The Grafana plots some graphs, some visual representation of data so that we can have a look at it. Let's have a look at the what a Grafana dashboard could look like. So this is the dashboard from Grafana website. It's plague.grafana. So here you can have gauges like these. You can have some numbers, how many times these operations per second, 8 operations per second for certain operation, maybe read, write or something. Number of connected clients. You can have live number of clients. You can have uh, monitor the system, memory usage and everything using the Grafana. This is the one of the way Grafana visualize the data. And this is the other way. The Grafana is used for plotting some graphs. So these spikes could represent the traffic. So let's say at that specific time the traffic spiked up because it's a maybe dummy data. That's why we have consistent spikes like this. But in a real application, the spikes would look very different. So this is how a Grafana is used for monitoring purposes. So yeah, we have discussed a little bit more in detail about API component, how the app request will flow into a system, and a little bit more detail about ELK stack. So that's it for this video. In next video, we will be having a look at more components. Thank you.